There's someone in your life who keeps crossing lines, not dramatically, not obviously enough, that you feel fully justified calling it out. They say something slightly too personal. They push just a bit too far with a joke. They reach out exactly when you said you needed space. And when you pull back, they act confused, like they had no idea, like it never happened. Here's what's strange. It keeps happening. Different situations, same pattern. And somewhere along the way, you start wondering if maybe the problem is you. It's not. What you're experiencing has a name. It's called boundary testing. And it is far more deliberate and far more revealing than most people ever realize. By the time this ends, you'll understand not just why it happens, but what they're actually looking for when they do it. What boundary testing actually looks like. Most people picture a boundary violation as something loud. Someone says something terrible, does something obviously inappropriate. You feel it, you name it, you walk away. But real boundary testing almost never looks like that. It looks like someone borrowing something without asking, just once. A friend who keeps canceling at the last minute. A partner who responds to your discomfort with, "You're too sensitive." A coworker who CCs your manager on an email without mentioning it to you first. Each moment, taken alone, seems forgivable, explainable, maybe even imagined. But here's the detail that matters. It's the repetition that gives it away. One boundary crossed is often a mistake. 2 is a coincidence. 3 or more is a pattern. And patterns always have reasons. What's happening isn't random. They push slightly, then they go quiet. And they watch. What do you say? How do you react? Do you address it or let it go? Your response or your silence becomes their data. The hidden psychology behind it. So why do people do this? The short answer, they're trying to figure out how safe you are. For many people, especially those who grew up in unpredictable environments, relationships feel fundamentally uncertain. Affection came with conditions. Closeness was sometimes warm, sometimes punishing. And so, as adults, they test. Not always because they want to hurt you, but because they need to know. Will you stay? Or will you eventually leave or explode? Psychologists describe this as a form of proximity testing, a way of checking emotional safety without the vulnerability of directly asking for it. The border they cross isn't really the point. What they're reading is your reaction to it. If you get angry, they feel confirmed. Relationships are dangerous. If you go silent, they feel temporarily relieved. But they file that silence away as permission. Neither response gives them what they actually need. We'll come back to that. The small violation pattern and how it escalates. Here's where it gets more uncomfortable. Boundary testing almost always starts intentionally small. So small that naming it feels disproportionate, dramatic, even. They text after you said you needed quiet time. You don't respond, but you also don't address it. So they try again, a little more. They make a personal comment in front of others. You laugh it off. And slowly, without any single moment, you can point to the baseline shifts. This is what behavioral researchers call incremental norm erosion. When a small violation goes unchallenged, it becomes the new normal. The next push doesn't feel as large because you've already unconsciously adjusted to the last one. And here's the part that gets most people. You adapt. You start calling it just how they are. You start working around them without realizing you've already surrendered ground you didn't mean to give. That's the most effective thing about this pattern. It doesn't announce itself, it accumulates. What your response tells them now, here's what almost nobody thinks about. When someone tests your limits, they're not just learning where the line is. They're building a psychological map of you, how you handle tension, whether you prioritize peace over honesty, whether your words and your actions actually match. Someone who consistently absorbs discomfort in silence sends a clear signal. There is more room here. Someone who reacts with immediate anger sends a different one. This person can be unsettled. Remember that. Neither is a position of strength. Both are predictable. The person who is hardest to test is not cold, not explosive, but simply clear. They tend to receive far fewer violations over time. Not because people fear them, but because the answer was already given. The boundary was communicated once, calmly, without negotiation or drama. Clarity doesn't just communicate the limit, it removes the reward for testing it. Two types of testers and why it matters. Not all boundary testers operate the same way, and treating them as identical is one of the most common mistakes people make. The unconscious tester is usually carrying deep insecurity or an unmet need for connection. They've never learned to ask for closeness directly. Testing is the only language they have for checking whether you're still safe, whether you're still there. These people can change, but only when you stop silently absorbing the test and start naming what you see with calm directness. The conscious tester is different. They've learned, often over many years, that people rarely push back against small violations. They use boundary testing deliberately to establish dominance, build dependency, or simply to see what they can accumulate. This type watches your face when they cross a line, not the expression you show the room, the micro-expression you suppress. They're looking for the flicker of discomfort you bury. With the conscious tester, being understanding is often misread as permission. What they actually respond to is consistency. The same boundary, communicated the same way, every single time, without softening or re-explanation. How to actually respond. So what do you do with all of this? 3 things, and the order matters. First, name what happened, not just how it made you feel. There's a significant difference between, "I felt really disrespected when you did that," which opens a negotiation about whether your feeling is justified, and, "I said I needed space, and you contacted me anyway." Don't do that. One is a complaint, the other is a boundary. Second, stop explaining yourself. Past the first sentence, over-explaining is one of the clearest signals you can send that you're uncertain. You're allowed to have the limit you just stated. It reads as, "I'm not sure I deserve this boundary, so let me convince you. You don't need their agreement. You need the behavior to change." Third, and this is the one most people skip, notice if anything actually changes after you've communicated clearly. Because once is a message you delivered. Twice from them is a choice they made. If the pattern continues after you've been direct, that's not information about the boundary anymore. It's information about the relationship. Some people test your limits because they're afraid you'll leave. Some do it because they never learned any other way to measure closeness. And some do it simply because you haven't yet made it clear, calmly, firmly, without performance, that the test won't yield what they're looking for. The common thread isn't always malice. It's the absence of consequence. Boundaries don't protect you from other people in the way most people think. What they actually protect is the version of you that shows up in relationships. The one that doesn't slowly hollow out from years of quietly absorbing what others push your way. Here's what matters most. The moment you respond to a test with clarity, no anger, no long explanation, no collapsing, you change the dynamic. Not just in that moment, in every interaction that follows. Because now they know. And knowing changes everything. If this explains something you've felt but couldn't quite name, the next video on how emotionally detached people are perceived in close relationships goes even deeper. Watch it next. The psychology connects more than you'd expect. You don't need to be the loudest person in the room to be the most grounded.